So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Katholische Akademie in Berlin. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our two speakers, Professor Abdullahi An-Na'im and Professor Otto Kallscheuer. Mediation of the secular and the religious, an Islamic perspective. This is our topic today. And let me confess as a Catholic that I'm keen to learn from this Islamic perspective. Not too long ago, about 100 years, the Catholics here in Berlin during the Wilhelminian era enjoyed a special right. They were allowed to refuse to give an answer to the question as to whether or not they affirmed religious freedom, as long as they behaved in such a way though they did. The state and the church found a very practical agreement. You might remember that it took until 1965 when Dignitatis Humanae was promulgated and Catholics in Berlin and elsewhere could affirm the right to religious freedom in full agreement with their faith. Time is a blind guide. These old questions of the equilibria of the secular and the religious are raised again. Not only for Catholics and not always in theoretical discussions, but also in many believers' daily lives. And I think that we both, Christians and Muslims, share similar challenges in dealing with that issue. On the one hand, and this is obvious, secularization came along with a great loss of Christian power and influence. And on the other hand, we cannot deny a wide range of benefits that secularization has granted all of us. Today, it is even harder to explain to non-believers that faith holds something valuable, even for a secular society. And we see how faith can also give license to and brutalize believers. Believers of all faiths are again forced to think about the fact that religion and faith are not necessarily good in themselves. And maybe more than ever, we need to develop far more powerful and positive narratives of successful mediations between the secular and the religious. I'm talking in the plural, because my own experience is that there are manifold ideas and visions about this. And of course, ideas cannot be suppressed. They need to be confronted and debated. And that is what we like to do tonight. So, first I'll shortly introduce Professor An-Na'im to you. He's currently Charles Howard Candler Professor of Law at Emory University in Atlanta, USA, an internationally recognized scholar of Islam and a human rights activist. In his books and articles, he brings to bear an impressive intellect and candor in addressing pivotal and controversial contested issues in contemporary Islam. Abdullahi An-Na'im's ideas did not develop in a vacuum. He was born and raised in the Sudan and holds a PhD in law from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. During his undergraduate years and also afterwards as a graduate lawyer and as a lecturer at the University of Khartoum, he joined the Islamic reform movement of Muhammad Mahmud Taha and became a student of his teachings. As Islamic fundamentalism was taking stronger hold on Sudanese society and politics, the movement was suppressed and Taha, his teacher, was executed. Abdullahi An-Na'im left the country. In a lecture, he postulated, Sudan has suffered for 20 years now because of the dangerous myth that the Sharia can be enforced by the state. Hoping to be able to return to Sudan, he held a series of short-term positions until the early 1990s at universities in Sweden, Canada, and Egypt. During this time, he translated the main work of his teacher, Muhammad Taha, and wrote his book, which is greatly inspired by Taha's work, Toward an Islamic Reformation, where he offers a theoretical framework for developing a modernist reformulation of Sharia that is consistent with international human rights standards. In the early 90s, Sudan was still governed by fundamentalist forces. An-Na'im gave up hope of staying in the Sudan and accepted the position of Executive Director of Africa Watch. It was during this time that he wrote many articles on the Islamic foundations of religious human rights. In 1995, he joined the faculty of Emory Law School in Atlanta. He was granted tenure in 1997 and became Charles Howard Kendler Professor of Law in 1999. In 2008, he published the book Islam and the Secular State, Negotiating the Future of Sharia, which was widely discussed in debates about secularism. His academic work always was accompanied by commitments for human rights in countries such as Cameroon, Malaysia, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda, where he founded and supports various projects such as Rights at Home and Women on Land. Thank you for coming. And I'm also very glad to welcome Professor Kallscheuer. In comparison with the biography of Professor An-Na'im, the story of someone from the Western comfort zone seems to be almost normal, but only almost. Professor Kallscheuer is a philosopher, professor of political science, and well-known author and editor of several publications on religion, society, and politics. He is what I would call a public intellectual and is often consulted as a policy advisor. One of his books deals with the Occident before it was one of that comfort zones. He also published a profound book on Christian theology, often writes for German and international newspapers, and holds numerous international research fellowships, such as at the University in Princeton, Vienna, Münster, and Basel. He has taught political science and political philosophy here in Berlin at the Freie Universität. Actually, he works in a wide range of fields. One could even say that this is one of his characteristics. Being a philosopher who traces different intellectual ideas from various backgrounds. Therefore, it was not a surprise that he answered my request to come here with the words, "I appreciate a lot Abdullahi An-Na'im's book." Professor Kallscheuer, I'm very delighted to have you here as well. We will now first listen to Professor An-Na'im's lecture, and after that, Professor Kallscheuer will give his insights on the topic, which will hopefully open a productive discussion, including questions from those of you in the audience. But now, without further ado, Professor An-Na'im, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I begin by a caution about language. English is foreign to me as it is foreign to you. So, and I often find that despite caution about the slippery slope of language sometimes and how we tend to aggregate or to essentialize concepts that are complex and delicate in their own origin, tend to simplify and essentialize in hope of communication. And we tend to also to compare. And I think comparisons are very tricky also, especially among not only different religions, but even within the same religion. The very idea of religion is problematic. The idea that we tend to describe certain sets of beliefs and practices as a religion, and then we tend to impose our understanding of our religion on that other religion, and assume that it must react in the same way that our did because they are both religions. All of these are cautions just to say that speaking about religions and the secular and the relationship should not be assumed to be the same across religious boundaries, and the very idea that there are boundaries is self-problematic. The very relative and contextual nature of the relationship between any religion and any secular. In fact, I find the idea of the secular itself problematic from an Islamic point of view. I don't think that Muslim theology or Muslim history would warrant a sharp dichotomy between the secular and the religious. So the concept itself, it is not that they are two incompatibles, but that they are in fact inherently compatible. So the question is not quite familiar to Muslim audiences and intellectual history because it is conceived in a different context regarding another different religion and not necessarily of the same region as the Muslim societies are. And again, with all due respect, I don't mean to offend, but I find it important to challenge. So when I say things which may sound challenging or a bit harsh, it is not my intention to be offensive. But the fact is that the trouble with European modernity is that it tended to project itself globally, imperially. And in so doing, created a barrier to the concept of the modern and the modernity in other cultures which assume that this is the phenomenon that they are talking about and we don't want it precisely because they want us to have it. So you get that quite intellectual and political challenge to the concept early in the relationship between European and other societies. And we cannot forget the history of colonialism. It is not, in fact, a history. It's a constant and current reality. The colonial and the post-colonial and the neo-colonial are still with us. And I may have occasion to say more about that. But the point, of course, after all, we are in Berlin. And it was the Berlin Conference of 1884-85 that carved up Africa among the 12 European and North American powers who were present at that conference. So the legitimation and the assumption that Africa is a sovereignty vacuum to be divided up among European powers in Berlin in 1884-85, with, of course, obviously, for nothing for African people to say about that. And what has that got to do with modernity? Whose modernity are we talking about? So the context is, I think, is the context of realities of the colonial and the post-colonial, and we should not forget. But I would like to introduce an idea, and I am hopeful. The very fact that I am here, although I speak in a foreign language to me, to an audience to whom the language is foreign too, but the very fact that I am here and that you are here signifies to me a very sort of powerful element of and charge of hope and optimism. The point that I would like to suggest is that I recommend something which I call the past colonial. So to me, the colonial and the post-colonial remain too connected conceptually, epistemologically, and politically, and in other ways, that it is difficult for the post-colonial societies to really go forward in their own name, seeking their own self-determination. So I argue that colonialism was part of our history, but it need not be our future. And in fact, it cannot be our future. And for those of us who come from post-colonial societies, I come from Sudan. Sudan was a British Egyptian colony for the 10 years of my life, the first 10 years of my life. So it is not that far back. Maybe I'm that old, but still. So the point is of the past colonial is that it seeks to decolonize all aspects of the colonial, including conceptually and epistemologically. So in other words, I'm trying to seek to find ways in which we can speak of our experiences, of our religion relationships to politics and to the state without necessarily embodying or incorporating European concepts and ideas. Because Europe is not the Muslim world and Islam is not Christianity. And I think that it is legitimate for every religious community to struggle for its own understanding of its own religion on its own terms. And it cannot be otherwise. That the very idea of self-determination, or religious self-determination, is this idea of emancipating our minds and decolonizing our minds, as well as our territories and our relationships. And I would suggest that the need for decolonization is true of the mind of the colonizer as well as it is of the mind of the colonized. That colonialism is a state of mind. It is a conception of the relationship of domination on the one hand and subordination on the other. And that true decolonization would require overcoming the impulse to dominate as well as the impulse to submit to subjugation. So it is not something that only Muslims or Africans need to do. It is that former colonial powers need to do and still do need to do that. It is not a history. It is still a current practice and experience. And for that, I think we need to really re-examine our assumptions and our claims and so on. I think the claims about the compatibility of Islam with democracy or its incompatibility with democracy is an ideological, not a theological question. The question itself is imperial. The idea is that there is something out there called Islam, which needs to prove its compatibility with democracy. But that question is not often raised in relation to Christianity. You don't see the question and the debate going on and on for decades about, is Christianity compatible with democracy? Is religion compatible with democracy? That question is reserved for Islam, and as I say, it is ideological, not a theological question. It is about trying to establish a particular relationship between concepts of modernity like democracy and human rights and constitutionalism with Islamic societies and Islamic ways of thinking. The claim about separation of Islam and the state or failure of Islam to be separate from the state are also similarly colonial and post-colonial, because the state in that question is a European state. Let us just think of, when we say Islam and the state, what state are we talking about? It is a territorial, hierarchical, bureaucratic, centralized state, which came into the Muslim world from European colonialism. It is not the historical pre-colonial state that Muslims knew for 1300 years before European colonialism. And therefore, the question about Islam and the state is a question, as I say, that is already conditioned by the context and the experience of colonialism on both sides of the equation. And as Muslims continued to contest or to accept that claim in the post-colonial, they continue to do so with a colonial mindset. And I think that it is important that we should remember that, and this is a matter that you can very, very easily verify. The term Islamic State does not exist in any of the languages of Muslim societies until the 20th century. Let me repeat in case the term Islamic State does not exist in any of the languages of Muslim societies until the 20th century. It is a post-colonial concept because the state in that formulation, as I say, is a European state. And the notion that Islam is linked to that state, as I say, is a post-colonial sort of contestation of political power and formation that Muslims need to come to in order to be able to move on with their lives. In fact, my claim is this. It is stronger than it may have come across already. my claim is that there is no such thing as an Islamic state. Never has been, never can be. It is conceptually impossible for the state to be Islamic. Only people can believe, only people can become Muslims or not Muslims, not institutions. The state is a political institution incapable of having a religion. Whenever we say a state is Islamic, what we mean is that it is a state where the elites who control the state impose their view of Islam through the institutions of the state. But as an institution, the state is sort of in the hands of whoever is in control of it. And we know that from experiences all over the world. After all, again, with all due respect, in this country too, there was a state, there was a time when the German state was fascist. And now the German state is democratic and liberal. So it is not inherent in the state, it is in the hands of whoever controls it. And the political choices of the people who control that. And for that reason, I think that it is important to understand that the question itself is not really quite appropriate in the Muslim context. Another claim I make is that Sharia cannot be enforced by the state. Not that it should not be, that it cannot be. That a norm of Sharia ceases to be Sharia by the very act of enacting it as a state law. It becomes the political will of the state and not the religious law of Muslims and Islam. So, in other words, the idea of an Islamic state to enforce Sharia is incoherent, is historically unprecedented, and is practically untenable. There is no such a thing. And the fact that some Muslims have, in the 20th century, for the first time in Muslim history, started talking about this does not make it so. So the fact that, as this claim that there is something called an Islamic state, and a claim that Sharia can be enforced by the state. These are claims, as I said, of the 20th century, which are made by people, but does not make it real. They are not true because they are made. Because we know that states are claimed to be all sorts of things, and they are not of that quality by virtue of being called as such. And again, with all due respect, let me cite a recent example. There was the Democratic Republic of Germany and the Federal Republic of Germany. Not too far ago, 20 years or so. Democratic Republic of Germany was not democratic because it called itself democratic. And nobody had any doubt whatsoever that it is not democratic by virtue of being called democratic. So why is it that we say that Saudi Arabia says it's an Islamic state, therefore must be something called an Islamic state, and that Saudi Arabia must be an Islamic state? Please just consider. Iran claims to be an Islamic state, and Saudi Arabia claims to be an Islamic state. To each other, they are heresies. The Wahhabi doctrine of Saudi Arabia considers the Ja'fari doctrine of Iran to be a heresy. And the Ja'fari doctrine of Iran considers the Wahhabi doctrine of Saudi Arabia as a heresy. So which of the two is Islamic? And how do we know? And how can we verify? And now we have this subsect called ISIS, which claims to be an Islamic state against all those other two already. So would the Islamic State please stand? Where is it? What is it? The point is that the quality of being Islamic is not agreed so that it can be applied to a situation to say, you have boxes to tick. Does it have this? Does it have that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It is Islamic. If it has only 2 out of 5, then it is not Islamic. Who decides that? Who defines what the criteria is, and who applies that criteria? It's all inherently political. That's why the elite who control Iran call it an Islamic state, the elite who control Saudi Arabia call it an Islamic state, and now ISIS claim themselves to be an Islamic state. So let me not dwell too long on this, but if you like to come back to it, we can do that. But I would like to suggest that the nature of Islam, theologically speaking, and the nature of Sharia also, theologically and historically speaking, defy the possibility of an Islamic state to enforce Sharia. And the reasons are twofold. On the Islam side as a religion, there is no concept of institutionalized religious authority. Never has been in Muslim history, meaning that there is no authority that constituted that declares what is an Islamic doctrine and testifies whether it is Islamic. That does not exist. It still does not exist. So therefore, it is the quality of being Islamic is inherently in the hands of Muslims constantly. I argue that Islam is radically democratic theologically, meaning that there is no inherent authority that can define what is Islamic anywhere, not acknowledged by Muslims anywhere. Even now as we speak, you have multitude of religious authorities and multitudes of varieties of relationships that people have to each other and to their institutions. So the idea of being Islamic, therefore, and the idea of being secular or not secular is playing in a very different field when we talk about Islam and Muslims. And the idea of Sharia, again, is that it cannot be enacted. It has never been enacted. Meaning what? Meaning that, again, historically, factually, there was never, ever a code of Sharia until the Ottoman Majalla in the mid-19th century, which codified only one school, the Hanafi school, regarding one specific field. Because it is practically impossible to codify Sharia. Whatever view you codify is a human view of Sharia, never Sharia itself. Which is also one of the issues about calling a state Islamic. Because often people, when you say, of course it's Islamic, look, the Prophet Muhammad himself was a political ruler. The state of the Prophet in Medina was too exceptional to be relevant. The state of the Prophet in Medina was too exceptional to be relevant. What I mean by that is that it is a state which was presided over by someone Muslims believe to be a prophet, who was receiving revelation until the day he died. And to whom, at the same time, the same man, to non-Muslims, was simply a political leader. He had no religious standing whatsoever. So to whom was the Prophet a religious/political leader? To the Muslim, he was a prophet. There was no question of his being a political leader. He could not be contested. He could not be accountable on political grounds. And for the non-Muslims, he was not even a prophet. He had no religious authority whatsoever. And I say it is too exceptional to be relevant because Muslims believe that you cannot have a religion after Muhammad. Sorry, not a prophet after Muhammad. So unless we can have another prophet, we cannot have a possibility of replicating Muhammad's state in Medina. From Abu Bakr coming forward up to the present time and into the future, all political leaders were just political leaders. They were not religious leaders. Abu Bakr was not a religious leader. He was the Khalifa, which was a political office, which he exercised as a political office. And the point is that the difference between Muhammad and Abu Bakr is that what the Nabi ﷺ said was to Muslims, Islam is self. What Abu Bakr said was Abu Bakr's view of Islam, never Islam is self. In other words, that when Abu Bakr spoke of any religious issue, He was expressing his opinion of the issue. He was not expressing the Islamic view of the issue, because that is not for any human being to settle against other claims of similar views that contest the issue. And there is an example that is also very early in the Muslim history, is the so-called the War of Apostasy. That is, when certain Arab tribes refused to pay zakat to the state in Medina, and they said, we owed allegiance to Muhammad. Muhammad is dead. We are not going to pay tax to Abu Bakr or to Medina. There was a question of, should we go out to fight or not? And Abu Bakr said we should go and fight. Umar, Ali, Usman, all the major companions said no, we should not fight them. If it was a religious issue, there wouldn't be a question of Abu Bakr saying something and anybody else disagreeing with him. So that is what I mean about the political nature of the state. And historically, that again never happened throughout Muslim history, and that is also something we can talk about. If you know of any example of an Islamic state, actually, when you can verify that, let us talk about it. I think that all monotheistic religions have a similar problem. And again, I cautioned at the beginning with comparisons, but I think the problem is that the nature of the religious doctrine is always a human construction. And yet it's supposed to convey the will of the divine. So there is a challenge or a question of how do you bridge the gap between the divine and the human. And what we tend to do is we tend to sort of project divinity on human interpretation of the divine. That interpreting the Quran is always necessarily a human act. It cannot be, the Quran is no longer divine when it enters human comprehension. It becomes part of our human consciousness, part of our human experience. And that is why and how it has value in our lives. If it remains divine, then it has no practical application. It becomes applicable only when it is translated and transformed from a divine state into being a human discourse, and so on. So that is part of the difficulty. I think that at least from the Islamic point of view, and I'm hinting at other difficulties that other monotheistic religions may have, but it is that problem of the nature of the divine and so on. In the title also you see the point about when I say mediation of the secular and the religious, an Islamic perspective. An Islamic perspective is to emphasize there are multiple Islamic perspectives, that this is not the only Islamic perspective. And I fully agree and accept the fact that other Islamic perspectives exist and could be more persuasive than mine. And myself, I may change my mind about my perspective if I am faced with a stronger argument. So I present it in that spirit. But the point is that what is Islamic about it? What makes it Islamic? Why should I insist on an Islamic dimension of the nature of the state and so on? Is because I'm a Muslim. And to me, the question is important. I would not presume to judge anybody else's perspective and convictions and beliefs, but I would not accept anybody else's presumption to judge mine. And that is the very nature of what I meant about the neo-colonial nature of the relationship. That Germans will choose to write their own constitution, to draft their own treaties, to ratify or not ratify, to do whatever they do as a matter of a sovereign state. So would I. And there is no difference. Therefore, there is nothing inherent about my having to explain why do I seek an Islamic foundation, because it is important to me. And because I am the one who is making the choice. I am the one who is responsible for the choice I make. And I would not presume to say you cannot have the same for yourself if you choose to do that. So, but therefore, it is an important question to me, and the answer does not go into theological sort of hermeneutical arguments. It goes into a fundamental question of the nature of the religion itself in relation to the believers. that it has to be a matter of choice. That, again, the way that I try to explain this point is that belief has to be a choice. Otherwise, it has no value. That is, if I do not choose to be a Muslim, there is no value to my being a Muslim. Therefore, it has to be a choice, meaning that the possibility of disbelief has to be equally available to me, so that by choosing belief, I presumably gain this value, a religious value. By choosing to remain as a disbeliever or unbeliever, I don't have that value. So it is inherent to the possibility of being a Muslim that it has to be briefed by conviction and choice, or else it is irrelevant, it's useless, it's valueless. And of course, before you get into reading the Quran to give the verse, this verse, that verse, you have to make that paradigm shift. That is, you have to acknowledge the inherently voluntary nature of religious belief and practice. That Sharia, performing Sharia, has no value, religious value, unless it is done voluntarily with conviction and choice. That is, for example, if I happen to spend the whole day without eating or drinking, that does not count as fasting, because I did not intend beforehand to fast. So the intention beforehand to fast is essential, which is called niyyah in Arabic, which is essential for the religious validity of the act. So this sort of fundamental question is why I think it is important to make that point clear before we move on to any hermeneutical or detailed discussion, because questions of interpretation of the Quran are, of course, notoriously difficult and controversial and contested. And whatever interpretation I present, someone else will present a counter interpretation, which is fine. In fact, to me, that is the beauty of it. But the point is that I should not presume that people will agree with me on my paradigm before I move on to hermeneutical detail, and have to contest that, to clarify and emphasize that point itself. Now, moving on, as I say, time is short. I would like, coming specifically to the question of mediating the secular and the religious, I think that for me, there is an interdependence between religion and modernity. And again, here you get the, what do you mean? When did Hegel say this? When did Kant say that? With all due respect, Hegel is irrelevant. He is next door. To me, it's irrelevant. Kant is irrelevant. Absolutely. He has no notion whatsoever, with all due respect, of what it is to be Muslim, or who is a Muslim, or who is an African. I did not count in their thinking as an equal human dignity, a human person with equal dignity and rights. I did not. That was their world, that was their vision, and that is fine. But for me, arguing about what it means to be Muslim and what does it mean to stand with certain values has to be an internal conversation, not an external conversation, and so on. But the point is that I think that the interdependence by modernity, I mean points about sort of human dignity, autonomy, choice. And I don't think that these principles are not found in Muslim thought and Muslim sources historically from the very beginning. It is true that these concepts, these ideas were there from the beginning, and they were there in relation to the time and context in which people were living. At the same time that they were or were not absent or present in any other society, that was the nature of human relationships and human development and evolution. I think that the two, the religion and modernity, need each other substantively as well as procedurally. That is, it is both about that how religion needs secular needs modernity and modernity needs religion is substantive, meaning as a matter of values. Now, we tend to assume that modernity is either value-free or inherent, that its values are in itself. But I would like to contest that. I would like to suggest that modernity, without some source for ethical foundations which are outside the modern framework as such, is not likely to be really humane or civilized and so on. And after all, of course, the Soviet Union was the ultimate modern state, and Nazi Germany was the ultimate modern state, and yet there were states with whose ethical, normative thinking we have profound difficulties and problems. So we should not assume that modernity carries with it its own sort of normative content. And I would like to suggest that religion can provide that normative content, but that modernity can provide a procedural way for religious contestation, and by the same points about pluralism and about the possibilities of human individual freedom and dignity and rights, which are modern ideas that have come about through recent developments in human history. Those values are necessary for religion. So in other words, I believe in interdependence between religion and human rights, religion and secularism, with the secular state, and so on, in the same way that you find that the two paradigms are interdependent. I think that the notion of individual autonomy and freedom is needed by both religion and secularism in order to carry the possibility of the human person making the claim. And here, as I said at the beginning or earlier on, the fact that Islam has to be a choice means it's an individual choice. There is no possibility of collective belief. Collectivities are not entities to make choices. Collectivities do not think. Collectivities do not speak. It is people who do, and people who make the choices that they make. Therefore, the ability of a person to make an autonomous individual choice is inherent to the possibility of being a Muslim. Again, as I'm recalling what I said earlier about this point too. And moving on, I think that in the Muslim context, I would like to suggest that religious authority is inherently individual and personal. By that I mean, as I said earlier, there is no institutional authority. That you would not find an institution that declares what Sharia is. Never existed. That any principle or norm of Sharia that you choose, you will find that it evolved through what we call intergenerational consensus. Meaning that, take any norm, for example, about contracts, defining what is property. What is the definition of a property? What is the definition of a contract? These are not declared by anybody anywhere. A definition of riba. What does riba mean? What is a commercially, an Islamically acceptable or unacceptable transaction is? All of this evolved through people expressing ideas, other people accepting or rejecting those ideas. Over time, intergenerationally, from one generation to the next to the one after, a consensus emerges around certain principles, and a consensus emerges around rejecting other principles. And that is what comes to be Sharia. Because we do not have an enacting institution, there is no Vatican. I respect, and with all due respect to where we are, there is no Vatican, never has been. There is no council that declares religious doctrine, never has been. It has always been a matter of individual choice regarding views that were expressed by human beings and which over time got to be accepted or rejected. And if you like examples of that, the very the doctrine of usul al-fiqh, that is the Islamic methodology of interpretation of sources to bring out notions of Sharia norms and institutions, is self-evolved over time. Literally translates into the sources of, or the science of interpretation or science of sources of jurisprudence evolved over time, and it was not accepted when it was first proposed. It emerged over time after several generations. So if you go back to the first century of Islam, if you go back to the second century of Islam and say Sharia, nobody would know what you are talking about. The term itself is a product of the 3rd century. If you go and talk, say, usul al-fiqh, which is the science that all Muslims today rely on in order to interpret Sharia from Islamic sources, again, they would not know what you are talking about. It emerged subsequently. Al-Shafi'i, who is believed to have been the founder of the usul al-fiqh, did not know that he was a Shafi'i. By that I mean his own book, Al-Risala, in which he explained this emerging science, was not accepted by Muslim scholars for 100 years. So all of this is to emphasize the question of human choice and individual responsibility, that it was not a collective decision that is made by some institution, or that people just tend to follow without understanding what they are talking about, and so on. And I think that therefore the question of choice and experience have to remain, and the question of autonomous freedom has to remain inherent to the possibility of being a Muslim. Now, moving on to conclude, actually, by saying that still the question of the relationship between religion and the state remains. And it is, when I started with the question about language, this is the part actually I was thinking of. Because when I speak about certain things, people will assume, aha, you mean Germany, or you mean the United States. I don't really mean Germany or the United States. I mean to make a point. And each person, all of us can take from that point what they choose. The problem with state support of religion is that it tends to be the kiss of death for the authenticity and dynamism of the religious faith itself and its tradition. But at the same time, the state's hostility to religion can also be extremely repressive and counterproductive, again, for the vitality. Although religions don't die by virtue of, or because they are subjected to oppression, but the possibility of growth and development and dynamism is limited by that fact. So it is, in the case of the state, we have really a very delicate situation where we cannot really accept state support of religion, and we cannot accept state suppression of religion. So it has to be something in between. And that in between is not necessarily the US system, and the first one that I'm referring to about state support of religion does not necessarily mean Germany. I don't think that is the issue. The issue is understanding the paradox and the dilemma that you have. Is that how to maintain the vitality and the autonomy of the individual believers and their choices and the dynamism of the religious tradition as such in the reality of state coercive power. So the state is in a position to even with the best of intentions, and of course the state itself is not, it is the people who control the state, with the best of intention may still try to promote and to support certain religious traditions, and in doing so they will inherently sort of repress others, because other different traditions do not fit the same model. So to make the point more concrete, that Muslims have to organize like Catholics and Protestants do in Germany in order to receive state support of their institutions. In requiring them to so organize, you are changing the nature of the doctrine of their faith and the nature of religious authority in their communities. And you are also suppressing the autonomy of individual believers who have to submit to establish religious authority in order to gain access to certain resources. So the question is problematic. It is neither in the so-called French view of repressing religious freedom altogether, nor is it in the German system which seeks to support the state, to support religious communities even-handedly, fairly, but still. the very nature of state action to be bureaucratized and institutionalized, I think it's destructive for religious doctrine and the vitality of religious belief. That the need that you have to regulate and you have to establish institutions with their powers and their sort of particular systems of administration, all of that is stifle the dynamism of religious freedom and belief. And for that reason, it is a difficult question. That's why I think the choice of the term mediation rather than regulation or adjudication is helpful. That we are dealing with a situation where we have to keep balancing one side against the other constantly and never really entrust the whole question into the hands of a formula that you can just turn it on and sit back and wait for it to produce what you need to have. That it has to be a constant engagement of the choices we make and the thinking and the reflection we have about our own traditions and other traditions in our communities. Ultimately, I think we have to protect freedom from religion as we are to protect freedom of religion. And that applies to communities as well as to state institutions. It is not just simply that freedom from religion is only the product of state sanction, nor is that the question of freedom of religion always protected by the state. In fact, both state and community have to act and refrain from acting in certain ways in order to protect both types of freedoms, or the two sides of the same coin of freedom. Freedom from religion and freedom of religion. When communities dictate to members of that community what they should believe and how they should behave, that is a risk to their, in fact, a clear violation of their freedom of religion, as well as freedom from religion as understood by certain other human beings. But at the same time, if communities are not able to do that, what makes them communities? So it is difficult to keep the spirit and the nature of communities as vital safeguards for the integrity of our belief and practice without at the same time threatening the autonomy and individual choice of individual believers. I hope that I have raised sufficient questions for our discussion, but I don't think that I can say more than finally to close by saying that I need the state to be secular in order to be Muslim by conviction and choice. By a secular state, I mean one that is neutral regarding religious doctrine, not a secular society. For me, the secular nature of the state, that is the religious neutrality of the state, is necessary for the possibility of being a Muslim in community. That is, for a society to be an Islamic society, the state must be secular, must be neutral regarding religious doctrine. Closing the circle to say that since the state cannot be religious to begin with anyway, it is just simply acknowledging the reality and regulating the nature of the process by which the state and religious institutions can interact, whether theologically or otherwise, in order to maintain that balance. Thank you very much.
That was very inspiring. And let me first of all confess that I learned from your informative speech. And I think I already saw it also made you think a lot. So I think there will be a lot to discuss. I'm thinking the whole time, if I could say your idea of Islam is not very Catholic. I wonder if whether this is right or not. Anyway, to widen the scope of the discussion, I would like to ask Professor Kallscheuer now, first of all, for his comment.
Okay, it is difficult, obviously, to speak after such an inspiring speaker, and let me, but very briefly, the time is running out, only say that I'm very glad, I'm honored to be part of this dialogue, and if I may recommend to you to read, I have read only one book of his, Islam and the Secular State. One thing what is very impressive, and impressive about his approach is the dialogical nature of his very research, because parts of the book have been translated in various native languages of Muslim states, if I may use the word, of states, of nations with a more or less majority Muslim population, have been discussed. And then Professor An-Na'im has taken a provisory summary which illuminates the very historical process where this global problem of negotiating between the norms of monotheistic religion and the norms of liberal state institutions can coincide in a global process which, and there I'm surely impressed and agreeing on his perspective, it is not only the experience and the legal scholarship of the West, and that is difficult to translate in English, but in Catholic Academy one should use it, das Abendland, which would be the Old West, to quote a famous American politician. Now, the Old West, and not only the West, probably has the concept for this. Having said this, I must admit that I'm more honored than qualified to comment on Professor An-Na'im's remark, as I am no theologian, especially not a Muslim one, but I'm just a free-thinking liberal philosopher with a Renanian, as we say, from Cologne, with a liberal and with a bit existentialist background. And so I cannot but wholeheartedly agree the very stress of Professor An-Na'im of all the elements which for him, and I'm afraid that not every Muslim would agree with him, on personal choice, personal responsibility, and personal faith as the very essence of the Muslim faith, or of the dedication, if I may translate so, Islam, the giving over the trust in God. It's in this respect, to respond to your rather reasonable provocation, it is a kind of Protestant approach. Sola fides, it's only the personal faith in God which comes out of this very specific but very inspiring and very seducing interpretation of the very element of Islam. I'm not, and this obviously is a point where a free thinker, religious or not, of a Western society, cannot but agree. The last instance, in any case of conflict between conflicting normative systems, the secular or the religiously neutral, which I probably would prefer to say, in order to avoid all the misunderstandings which in the probably 20 different significations of secularism are in currency in the academic and non-academical world. So a religiously neutral political state leaves the freedom to the conscience of the believer. I'm not so sure whether this will be agreed by every Muslim, but I find it very convincing from a rather traditional Western perspective. If I may quote an important, not only in religious thought, thinker and master, faith only and inward sincerity are the things that procure acceptance with God. Faith is not faith without believing, and obviously the quote was by the arch-liberal John Locke. So if this is Islam, okay, then one might even agree to the theory or belief or legend that everybody is born Muslim, so that everybody has to be convinced by his personal conscience in order to believe. This is one element there which I found very sympathetic with, the very individualistic stance of Professor An-Na'im's interpretation of the very essence of dedication to the one God and the very essence of conversion, of religious communication, and of compliance to religious norms. The second element, which I've also found very convincing, is the necessary, analytically necessary, important differentiation between the concept of the state and politics. Politics is not the state. Certain institutions being called state in a very specific historical process. One can debate about this, but this is not the place to discuss about sovereignty, the Westphalian system, and so on. But it is at least a different concept. It's designating a different reality than politics and the public sphere. I could quote supporting or recognizing elements of his differentiation rather Western thinkers, to begin with the Catholic one, Jacques Maritain, in his book on the relationship between religious obedience and the liberal state, a book that he, as Professor Na'im, wrote his book, not by accident, wrote in the United States. He makes exactly the same difference. America, we all know the famous joke of Chesterton. American is a nation with the soul of a church, and one could add, because it is not a Christian state. It's a Christian society, and a very Christian, sometimes very fundamentalist society, but it's not a Christian state. And the other differentiation one could make from a Marxist, also a European thinker, Antonio Gramsci, who makes the very important distinction between the state and the civil society. And then after Gramsci, there are many other thinkers who make this differentiation. The public sphere, Jürgen Habermas, is part of the civil society. A statified public sphere becomes, that's a concept Professor An-Na'im uses in his book, becomes or can become totalitarian, a statified. So it is, in this respect, necessary to have free religion in a free state in order to have, within the civil society, within the public sphere, the contest, the competition, and even the fight, but the fight without violence, the fight with soft violence of the better argument, as Jürgen Habermas, our German Pope of secularism, uses to say. So this, I think, is very important, and it's a very important achievement, or for us Western people, it's very important to see that, how do you say, we didn't find the egg of Columbus alone. From other horizons, from other religions, you come to the very same heart of the question of what religious identity is. And one might add, this probably has to do, well, with the with monotheism or with what in Germany the important Egyptologist scholar Jan Assmann has called the mosaic question. It is the very essence, let us be essentialist in this point, the very essence of the monotheistic God, that he as a person is calling personal responsibility. Like Sartre, or from believing Christians like Luther or Kierkegaard, but it is this personal responsibility which comes to the fore. With this element, how are we with the time? Because I do not want to occupy too much. So, the rest I skip some of my notes, but I have to say something, well, in defense of our neighbor, of Hegel, because when I'm in the Catholic Academy, I'm always, my first pilgrimage, Katrin Wissen can also testify for this, is to go to the tomb of Hegel. As when I'm in New York, my first walk, or better run, is to the place where John Lennon lived. So just to put the things in order. But Hegel is important. Hegel is important for the same reason in the secular sphere, or in the intermingling, in the sphere of contest and debate between the secular and the religious communities. As for the Catholic Church, Vatican is important. Why? Hegel, but he's not the only one of the German idealists who thought about this, but he was perhaps the first thinker who tried to theorize in a serious manner about the necessity of institutions in order to preserve this very liberal liberty, this individualistic element that we, believers or not, do need for our personal change, for our personal choice, in order to follow the right guidance of a prophet or the Lord's law. We need institutions in order to get continuity, and probably also, this is a Catholic element in Hegel, the state Protestant theoretician, also in order, it must not be state institutions. The civil society, die bürgerliche Gesellschaft in Hegel is not exactly the same as in Adam Ferguson, but the continuity of institutions and the pluralism of institutions is necessary in order also to preserve the individual liberty. In an analogous way, and obviously every analogy is also a falsification, something, I do not say the Vatican, beware, but something like the continuity of institutionalized reflection of, righteous religious belief might be, I do not say a necessary, but a useful element of religious learning processes, in order that not each generation and each individual begins with zero. Having had conciles, Vatican II, where we, Catholics, if I may say so, arrived finally at the point that, according to Professor An-Na'im, Islam has proclaimed from the beginning. Maybe, so I confess that I'm not a total believer, but anyway, now we're at the same point, was only possible because these authoritarian, centralized church, with at the same time has been the hereditary of the Roman Empire and of the catacombs, so the martyrs in the Roman Empire, this complexio oppositorum, this paradoxical element, at least had has developed institutions which enable learning processes, sometimes also setbacks. And one of the problems for non-believing Muslims of the Islamic world is precisely, how to say, the absence of spiritual authority, or at least of institutions for the debate and for the consolidation of spiritual authority, which then can come to something that it's not just a matter of choice to say Daesh or ISIL is not the Islamic State but the Saudi Arabia, or there is no Islamic State at all. If it's all up to the personal belief of every individual Muslim, then, and in this respect, you are very coherent. There is no possible theory of statecraft by Muslims. There are only good or better politicians which happen to be Muslims. So I think I should, and now I have obviously more questions to ask than I could bring answers, but thank you so much for the possibility of this strife and dialogue.
So the point for me is that at every point of our humanity, we are individuals. Nobody is born in the company of anybody else. Well, nobody dies.
Mother was there.
Even if they happen to be killed by the same earthquake, the person dies as herself or himself, is resurrected as herself or himself, is accountable only for his own action and belief as himself or herself. So I don't see where the necessity of communal experience comes from for the validity of religious faith. And the fact that describing my position as Protestant, of course, I mean, I know that it's said, not maybe in this context as a compliment maybe, but no, with all due respect, no. I'm talking about something that preceded Protestantism by 1,000 years. So how can something that existed, and we know it exists in Quranic text, in lived experience, 1,000 years before, is now only to be coherent when fused with a modern doctrine like Protestantism in the recent history of Europe, which is only that. It's just simply in the recent history of Europe. Now, I think that I acknowledge the importance of community, but I think there is a tension between religious belief and communal experience and institutionalized experience, because institutions are about regularity. It's about conformity, are about sort of limiting the boundaries and defining the boundaries. Whereas individual faith is about doubt, is about contestation, is about discomfort. So we deserve religious credit for being doubtful, for being constantly questioning, and not for conformity. So yes, I think that the question of these are issues which should be debated and should be discussed. But what I plead for is just simply trying to take the Muslim experience on its own terms. And there is evidence, there is history. Please, I beg you, read the history. Yeah. I beg you, look for evidence of the claims that are made. Where in Muslim history, actually, in fact and practice, did we have this communitarian sort of authoritarian attitudes and practice? Where and when? With all due respect, if I am confronted with evidence, I will bow and respect. But if I am confronted with projections of ideological superiority, then with all due respect, I refuse and resist.
not clear? You wish to clarify?
Well, I can, but I think we should come in. We should come into the public debate and not only talk about it.
We don't clarify that point by now, but I think this is the time I would like to open the floor for a round of questions and comments you might have. I think it looked a bit like you would have a lot. Otherwise, I would also, maybe to give you a bit more time to resonate, I have a first question and then it's your turn. I see another danger which was coming up to my mind. At the moment, we try to assert very quickly that religion is, let's say, just moral guidance and in a way harmless. And I wonder if this could be a trap. I mean, by understanding religion as moral guidance, isn't there a shortcoming in what faith is supposed to be? That would be my question, maybe to both of you, and then it's your turn in the audience.
Yes, I think that I started by questioning against language, and also I said that speaking of religions in the plural is also problematic in generalizing sort of the element of faith, the element of praxis, the element of community, the elements of... These are terms and concepts that resonate with our religious experiences, which may not necessarily be true of other religious experiences. If you take traditional African religions, for example, or indigenous North American religions, the idea of the term religion itself and the concept of religion itself is externally imposed. It is a way of life. It is not compartmentalized into faith and sort of religious guidance of behavior. It is all together. So what I'm struggling with is, in the Muslim faith, yes, the element of faith and the element of practice, and the emphasis on that you have to believe and you have to act on your belief, and to be accountable for your action. Those are elements which are very familiar to me, and I would accept them immediately. But I would not presume to say that this is true of all religions and of all communities.
I think, Catherine, you are right, because also monotheistic religion, I spoke a little earlier about existentialism. If you think at the four versions, which are there five? Which Kierkegaard gives of the order of God to Abraham or Ibrahim to slaughter his son. And then at the end, when we do not know, because we have no mental protocol of Ibrahim at that time, what and how far he would go, there comes the messenger, the angel of God, to take away the son. There are two possible sons corresponding to the Christian or to the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim nomination. But anyway, to take it away and to give the lamb to slaughter it, which then has been a metaphor which has been very relevant for Christian doctrine and ritual. I do think that religion is not only nice, is not only moral guidance, but it has his terror and his force, because religion has in it, perhaps it's not the totally enlightened religion, but it's the back door which also enlightened religion takes with it, because it treats human suffering, the fear of death, the capacity of man, so as mankind, not males, even if males perhaps are more apt in doing terrible things, to overcome the instinct-guided behavior by animals by making their own responsible and terrible decisions. All this, to ban this or to cope with this, is probably also a question of religion. It is not, it's relevant, it is there, it is perhaps not totally translatable into enlightened religious or even secular norms. Professor An-Na'im is speaking also in his book in concepts which are relevant in the American political debate of translating religious reasons or religious elements into the secular discourse. In Germany, Jürgen Habermas, many of us might know this, is also speaking of translating the ideal stances of religion into secular, moral, or legal terms. Probably each translation loses also something. And I think, or it might be, I have no theory about this, but it might be that the very force of religion, which preserves itself perhaps not in the translation, but it lies in the background of translation, is also this element of terror. Terror in the things of terror of hell, of the fear, of fear and trembling. And when now, in the name of religion, or religion, some religion, Islam for Dummies, has been taken by some of the recruits for the Daesh, for the Islamic State, read Religion for Dummies, looking for the terror, not getting to religion, but getting to the terror, then this might have to do with a very ambivalent basis of religious force itself.
Now it's your turn in the audience. Before I get the mic back to you, please. You're welcome to answer your questions. Maybe the man with the white, mit der weißen Weste davon. Yeah.
My name is Inamullah Khan, and I am here in Germany, in Berlin, for the last 35 years. So I have got a lot of questions actually. But
one would be enough for now.
Yeah. My question is, you were talking about secular state and the religious state. First of all, unfortunately, there is no Islamic state in this world, even Saudi Arabia. And every Muslim knows better, and even you know better. So, the Federal Republic Germany is a so-called secular state. I would like to give an example. The secular state, Federal Republic Germany, is going to assist the Christianity, for example. They are going to assist through what you call the Christian tax. The Christian tax. Auf Deutsch kann ich mal sagen.
Ja.
Die kassieren offizielle, wie sagt man das, die Steuer. Also, das wissen Sie ja schon, das läuft schon. Also, they are going to collect officially the Christian tax for the church. And if they are going to assist being a secular state, the Christianity, they can also assist other religions as well. So this was my question.
Als Christ habe ich mich gegen Gewalt entschieden. Und zwar einfach deswegen, weil ich als Christ ein Kind der Auferstehung bin. Und die Auferstehung wiederum richtet sich gegen Gewalt. Gott sagt in der Auferstehung im Grunde genommen, die Gewalt hat niemals das letzte Wort. Und da frage ich mich, wie kommt es, dass Christen in den Jahrhunderten danach so viel Gewalt angerichtet haben, so viele Völker ausgerottet haben, Menschen, Völker negiert haben, ihren Glauben, ihre Einstellung, dass viele davon letztlich verrückt geworden sind. Ja, die sind damit nicht klargekommen, die sind daran gescheitert, an die Überheblichkeit der Christen. Und heute ist es die Überheblichkeit meiner Meinung nach der Europäer und der Amerikaner.
I wanted to clarify in my original remarks, which is religion is not an actor. There is no Islam out there. There is no Christianity out there. They are all embodied in human beings. So we should speak about Muslims, not Islam, about Christians, not Christianity. And when we speak about Islam, about Muslims, or about Christians, or about any other religious community, then we are talking about history. We are talking about the history that leads people to think in certain ways. Of course, they are responsible for the choices, but we can understand where the choices are coming from. We can understand why the action is taken. Okay? So when we look at the question of the tendency of human beings to engage in massive violence, we do not really, we should not attribute that to the concept or to the idea of the religion just joins them or the other type of ideology. Nationalism. Let us talk about a little bit, very rather bluntly. Nationalism has been a cause of human suffering and death and destruction over the last century, more than any religion has been throughout history. This continent was witness to people killing each other in the millions for nationalism, not for religion. The First World War, the Second World War were not about religion. They were about national ambitions and nationalism. But now we do not blame, even as recently as Bosnia and the genocide in Bosnia, less than 20 years, 15 years ago. It was about nationalism. If you look at Rwanda, it was about ethnicity and power. So it is, we can find and we can understand the multiple motivations and complex motivations that drive people. But I don't think that it is as simple as because of Islam or because of Christianity or otherwise. After all, I mean, again, colonialism was driven by Christian fervor, and people were killed in the Americas and were converted by force in the name of Christianity. Did that make Christianity responsible for that conduct? We wouldn't think so. So I think talking about the believers and their history and their context, and then we come to specifically to talk about recent experiences, about ISIS. Where did ISIS come from? When did we know about ISIS to exist? What are the conditions? So understanding those factors and those reasons rather than simplistically saying that because they are Muslim, they are doing this. I know I'm taking too long, but let me say this. There is 1.8 billion Muslims. 1.8 billion Muslims. A quarter of humanity, a quarter of human beings on this planet are Muslims. There are more Muslims in India than all over the Muslim world, the Middle East. India is the second largest Muslim population in the world. There are more Muslims in India than any other country except Indonesia. And yet, we would not associate the experiences and the lives of Indian Muslims with the negative notion of Islam. When we say Islam, we think of Saudi Arabia, we think of Iran, now we think of ISIS and Syria, but we don't think of India, where Muslims are members of, are citizens of a secular democratic state and have been since 1947. and that they have no doubt whatsoever in their commitment to that model of governance and state. So let us put things in perspective.
Yeah. Yes, but this makes it less easy just to blame all the problems, and nobody in this room would say that ISIS or other terrorist groups are the genuine outcome of Islam. But it makes it different to the shortcomings, and I think there are shortcomings in perhaps not the majority of the Muslim states, but for instance in the Arab world, with its recent tentatives, call it revolution, rebellion, or reforms, to come to terms with a democratic organization of the political in a secular state. It makes it difficult to blame all the difficulties, not only from the Western point of view, or from the Western ideologues who say, this is Islam, but on the other side to say, this is colonialism, or this is post-colonialism. For instance, in countries like Indonesia or India, colonialism, classical colonialism has been very longer operative than in the Arab world. And even in Egypt, you know better than me, as the Lord Kitchener's suppression of the Mahdi rebellion, which has been described, I do not know whether right or wrong. I'm sorry? Bitte? Okay. This is one element. You're right. I think oil kills democracy. Yes, but I do not think that this is the only reason why the countries with the language in which the original Quran, the message of liberty that Professor An-Na'im has so brilliantly taught to us, that so these countries have the greatest difficulty on earth amongst all post-colonial countries to come to terms with democracy. I do not know whether it's a result of Islam, but I know that, for instance, we Europeans, perhaps we are wrong, are seeing parallels to the confessional conflicts in the beginning of the modern era between Catholics and Protestants. Obviously, no state was a Catholic state and a Protestant state if one takes the criteria of Yeshua of Nazareth to be the definitions, the very element of Christianity, but they called themselves so, and they behaved rather brutally. Now, for political reasons, for regional power reasons, the major powers in the Middle East are also reenacting, for our perhaps short-sighted European eye, something like a repetition of a confessional conflict we had in Europe ago. And this second time is not a farce, as Karl Marx, the famous scholar of Hegel, next door, in his famous reprise of Hegel's Bon mot said. So, I think that in order to debate on about these problems, from a philosophical, existentialist point of view, convincing plaidoyer of Professor An-Na'im, this is not real Islam, may be right, but it doesn't help our political discourse.
Actually, it does help our political discourse. It does help our political discourse, because the point is, when we say Islam is incompatible with democracy, so, and then what?
I do not say that.
No, you said our discourse. I want to show how it helps our discourse. For one thing, the sense of proportion, which is, I take it to be a modernist concept, or the idea that that we have to value or evaluate the evidence in proportion. So if I have a case that is made against 5%, 10% of a population, I would not generalize over the rest of the 95% of the population. So when I said there are more Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa than there are Muslims in the Middle East, I mean to say that the violence of political Islam that we find in the Middle East is specific to the region more than it is specific to the religion, because the religion has a long history and has a global presence. So the question is, I said actually, let us keep things in perspective and proportion. But the point about I did not say that colonialism simply reductionistically is responsible. But we have to understand that colonialism has resulted in deep and profound dislocations in Africa, in Asia, and elsewhere. Now, Rwanda is almost 100% Catholic. And yet Rwanda is the only African country that experienced genocide. So it is not only about the presence, it is not only Islam and Muslims who have this difficulty with the post-colonial. Congo has been at civil war and has been as millions of people are dying for decades. And there is no presence whatsoever of Islam in that conflict. So you can cite examples from all over the continent that show that the post-colonial is a particular type of difficulty that certain societies. Now look at South Sudan. South Sudan broke away from the North. Part of the issue was the question of Sharia and the question of Arab domination and colonialism of the South. The level of violence that is perpetrated by South Sudanese against other South Sudanese who have nothing to do with Islam is staggering. So do we dismiss it all by saying, because these are tribal, primitive Africans who don't know better? Or do we try to understand the nature of the conflict and to try to resolve it as a conflict, as a political conflict? So my point is to say that it is not simply colonialism, but colonialism has a role to play in that, which is very significant. Now we talk about ISIS. In my view, the primary cause of the dominance and emergence of ISIS is the American invasion of Iraq. Understand the connection that the United States invades Iraq, takes complete control of the whole country, and then what does it do? Disbanded the Iraqi army. Imagine you have 900,000 troops, experienced troops, a whole structure of an army that was built over decades. You send it home in a day. And then you come and wonder how can ISIS be so effective? Because you disbanded the Iraqi army. There is no Iraqi army to stop ISIS. In fact, Iraqi army generals are the ones who are leading ISIS in this fight. So we can see the connections. I mean, is there any doubt, where did ISIS exist? Did ISIS exist before the American invasion of Iraq? Iraq was a secular state. Was there any doubt that the Ba'athist state was in fact a militantly secular state? Syria was a secular state. Islam had no role in the politics of Iraq or Syria until after the profound destabilization that was effected by the United States and Britain. Fortunately for Germany, I think that it's at the time stood in a more principled position.
I would like to raise 2 points. Professor An-Na'im is well-known scholar in this perspective, but I raised doubt about that his conclusion that the answer of the Muslim problems in the contemporary world right now is secularism and personal freedom. That this is the main message that I could understood from his presentation. But the concept of secularism itself is not an Islamic. It comes from the same source he questioned before when he said that state is a production of the colonial era or something like that. And secularism also, it doesn't come out from and Muslim or Islamic concept as well. So how can he integrate this non-Muslims secular concept to resolve some of the Muslim problems in this? The second that related to this as well, that is secularism concept is not, there is no agreement on what does it mean. It varies from different contexts, different historical and current experiences as well. So what does he mean by secularism? Is it keeping distance, same distance from all religion the same, or to keep the neutrality of the state on this? So this is one. The second point as well, that is, in Islam there is no nation state. If we bring it back, there is ummah concept. Islam doesn't believe on nation state, Westphalian nation state. It is about ummah, this original concept of that. And also this is not integrated in this conceptual framework as well. My last point, that is, he said the answers of this problem based on the freedom of the Muslim community. But I think the Muslim community could be problematic as well, because there might be conflict within the Muslim community, as we see right now in the contemporary world. Shia, Sunnah, within the Sunnah themselves, a lot of problem within the Shia. There are 12 sects over there. So I think the answer, and even according to the democratic majority rule, the collective political will of the majority of the Muslim community can impose their certain perspective of Islam. So I think the answer of the Muslim community as answer to this question is still problematic. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Mani from Egypt. I just wanted to comment on your idea about secularism and secular state guarantee freedom for individual in every society, and that's why it's the solution for Muslim people. And what came to my mind is Tunisia. Tunisia is the first Arab Muslim country to adopt the secular state in its French version, which we know, La Cité. And they even banned the head scarf in all official buildings, schools, universities, and deprived women, Muslim women who of course, Muslim inhabitants in Tunisia are 98% of Tunisia, and those women were deprived from their rights to education or to job. And even though Tunisia is the first country to rebel against its dictatorship, it's a dictator. However, I still agree and see Tunisia as a very inspiring country to be followed, especially in addressing women's rights and women issue. I'm not an Islamic scholar, so I'm not sure whether it's against Sharia laws, this reformation in family laws or not, but I still see this reformation was inspiring for women in Tunisia and even in all Islamic world. But I still see that secularism, as Professor Na'im said, is just like Islam. It's always in the hands of the politician who define how is the version to be applied in their country.
Now I give you both the last chances to react on that. I think you could start and you could have the last comment, and I think then it's really late.
Yes, I think these questions, which probably we cannot answer, show at least, show the importance of one element of Professor An-Na'im's thinking, which, by the way, is the title of this evening. It's mediation. It is, if you say, well, secularism isn't a very clear term, and I agree. Nobody could give you a list, but it would take us other hours. That's why I would prefer the religiously neutral state, and then we could debate. I understand also the protest of one participant who said, well, but in Germany, the German religious law privileges a certain form of organization which comes out of the German history with the confession. I cannot enter into this. I must agree with this description, but I would not exclude possibility of institutionalization of Muslim communities that can comply to this framework. It's a question of mediating between the three terms are secularism, or let us say a religiously not defined, not establishing one religion state, human rights, which is more important, I say also, than democracy, if democracy is just understood as majority rule. That was, to my opinion, the very big mistake of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egyptian. We have the majority, so we can do everything. No, democracy is less important than human rights. A democracy which comes to, we in Germany have had historically the expression, to empowering a dictatorial regime or a regime that cuts individual liberty is not the important thing. So, human rights and a religiously neutral state, and then vivid and possibly free religious communities. It's a question of mediation, and in this respect, I'm not a Catholic theologian, nor am I a Christian Democrat politician. But in this respect, the history and also the history of the Catholic Church is interesting, because the Catholics, in their practice in Germany, you told at the beginning, der Kulturkampf, the cultural conflict between a Prussian Protestant-dominated state and the Catholic Church led the Catholics to organizing a kind of societal pluralism, which then later, much later, 2 world wars later, was also the basis of Christian Democratic Party, which tried in a way which especially us leftists of the 60s were not very fond of, but at least integrated, mediated elements of human rights culture, of an authoritarian Catholic tradition, and of elements of neutrality in the state. I am not saying that by this the Western German Republic was the promised land, but it is an historical experience of mediating, an experience that other countries, for instance Tunisia, and I agree with the lady that made the question, which has already integrated elements of French, of Italian jurisprudence in first elements of constitutionality even before the dégage, the revolt against Ben Ali. It is processes of mediating are always historical, are concrete, and they require langen Atem. There's a sustaining of political effort. The German sociologist Max Weber told, das dicke Bohren harter Bretter, I cannot translate. You have to at least you have to be patient and you have to be sustained. And in sustaining this instance also of the political struggle, there, yes, I agree, the liberating element of monotheistic religion can be very helpful.
And actually, on this last note, my remark about the post-colonial is precisely to say that these societies have not had long experience, really, to come to terms with these concepts since the end of colonialism. So, how long did it take Germany to get to where it is? How did it take the United States or France? Well, I think is an indication of let us be patient and accept that societies change over time and that struggles for political autonomy and stability take time everywhere. And we should not be impatient. Oh, you have had 5 days already. Why aren't you democratic already? I mean, the Arab Spring so-called, I don't take this notion at that sense. It takes time. These societies are experiencing political transformation and change on their own terms, in their own time. And no matter how much impatient the rest of the world is, it's not going to happen until it happens internally in those societies by themselves. The very idea of democratic transformation is about self-autonomy and choice and independence. Coming back to the remarks about the question about secular is not Islamic and Ummah is not Islamic either. The notion of Ummah is an ideal that never happened in practice. There was not a single day ever when the Ummah existed as a political reality. It was an ideal that some people voiced. The day the Prophet died, and before he was buried, Muslims disagreed politically. And the schism that we now see between Shia and Sunni started that day. So there were those who supported Ali as the caliph and those who supported Abu Bakr as a caliph. The day the Prophet died. So when did this Ummah exist? The second point is to say that the notion of the nation state is also European. And we have chosen to keep it. Did you hear any Muslim leader or political leader talk about going back to the pre-colonial state of so universal Islam Ummah? Except the recent violent, but I'm talking about the states. That Sudan, our country, chose to remain a territorial nation state. Egypt chose to remain. So how come that one European concept you are willing to accept, another European concept you are going to reject because it is European? The point is that we don't accept or reject because it is European. We accept or reject what works with us, and what does not work, we reject. So the idea, and again, of the secular state, not secularism of society, but of the state, I said, that as religious neutrality of the state, there is no agreement, my friend said. Yes, and that is good, not bad, because every society should define its own terms of what its own secular state means. And will keep changing its mind about that, and will keep renegotiating the concept and the ideas and the institutions. So we should not rush to agreement. Agreement is illusionary. With human institutions, in fact, better when they are sort of clear about the possibilities and realities of disagreement than they are about agreement. Agreement always includes repressing some perspective in order to uphold others. When he said that majority rule should apply, but I agree with my friend very much that majority rule subject to the rights of the minority, even of a single person. So, but if you allow majority rule to prevail against the human rights of individual persons and their communities, you are into totalitarianism. You are not into democratic self-governance. I think that the point about Tunisia is also instructive. Yes, I think that Tunisia now in its current constitution does not define the state does not ascribe Islam to the state. The clause that says Islam is the religion of the state has been dropped from the Tunisian constitution. And it was dropped successfully because of the really significant compromise that the Nahda party was willing to make. So the Nahda, the Islamist political party of Tunisia, is the one that made it possible to drop the definition of the state as being Islamic by the the current Tunisian constitution. And that in itself also shows the nature of political evolution, that when people are faced with the responsibility of self-governance, they have to understand the need to make political compromises. And they make them. And we see this around the world also. So I think it's a question of understanding the complexity of the issues. If I hinted earlier on at any oversimplification or that colonialism is the reason and that, I apologize for that. Issues are complex. Issues are really sort of open to comparative reflection, but we should not assume that one size fits all or any notion of any place immediately applies to another place. We should understand that people need the very dignity of making their own choices. And the golden rule, I think that is really a very powerful and very simple idea. Whatever you would accept for yourself as a German citizen, you should demand for every other person, whether German or not, because these are human rights that you demand for yourself. Whatever you would reject, you should also equally respect the right of others to reject. So it is that notion of choice, of autonomy, of ability to experiment, trial and error, all these things we celebrate in our own lives. Why don't we understand and acknowledge the right of others to have the same rights? Thank you very much.
You have been very patient. Thank you very much. We all know there would be so much more to discuss, but let me first of all tell you that there's another chance to listen to Professor An-Na'im's ideas. He will be holding another public lecture tomorrow evening at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Hiroshima Straße. We agreed that the scope of the lecture today would be more theological, more theoretical, which Professor An-Na'im gladly fulfilled. Thank you so much. And tomorrow's lecture will be more political, and hopefully any unanswered questions, or maybe some of them, I know you have so many, will become clear tomorrow evening. It's at 6:00 p.m. Thank you once again for your attendance this evening, and you're very welcome to continue with the discussion at the reception in the hall. And I would also like to thank very much the interpreter, Johannes Hampel. Thank you so much. I'm sure the German listening audience didn't miss a single word. Thank you very much. Yeah, and most of all, thank you, both of you, Professor An-Na'im and Professor Kallscheuer. Once again, please extend your applause, and I hope to see you at the reception. Thank you a lot. Thank you.